I was working as a garrison military police officer. It was Thursday at about 03:45, and I was watching a stop sign as people tend to run the sign during the night thinking it was late enough to avoid getting pulled over. As predicted, someone blew right through the stop sign. I pulled the car over, and for some reason, this stop gave me the chills. I walked slowly up to the car, my red and blue lights somewhat making it hard to see. As I walked up to the car, I touched the back taillight. This is in case they flee, we would have prints to ID the car. And I noticed the windows on the car were heavily tinted. I couldn't even see in using a flashlight. When I knocked on the driver's window, it rolled down maybe 2 or 3 inches, enough for me to see a pair of old eyes looking at me. I cleared my throat and asked her to roll the window down all the way. She looked at me, and her eyes kinda gave me a look that seemed inhuman. She began to laugh, all the while she never took her eyes off of me. I tried to shake off the feeling of what the hell is this? I asked her again, to which she rolled the window down the rest of the way. She was red in the face, and she asked me if I knew there was a full moon. Before I answered, I shined my flashlight into the car and didn't find anyone else inside. I asked her for the normal documents, and she just looked at me and began laughing again. I opened her door and asked her to step out. By now I'm thinking she's drunk or high on something. Because I was alone, I told her she was being detained and I placed her in handcuffs. As I was walking back to my car with her to place her into the back, she screamed at me. She was calling for her baby. I hadn't seen a child, so I asked her where her child was. She told me the child was in the back seat. I put her in the back of the patrol car and told her that I was going to find her child. When the door shut, she began to let out an ungodly, ear-piercing scream. I looked in the back seat of her car and saw a green trash bag and decided to open it, which just about caused me to vomit. In the bag there was a cat's body with a large doll head attached to it. Immediately I called for EMS in case she was 5150 or mentally unsound, and I called for my sergeant as well. While I waited, I walked back to the patrol car to check on her. When I looked into the back of the car, she had slipped her hands out of her handcuffs, and in her arms were the cat's head. She was petting it and calling it her baby. Eventually, EMS and my sergeant arrived, and I gave them the rundown. Long story short, this woman was schizophrenic who had failed to take her medications. This was one of the most creepy things I had ever dealt with. What is even worse is when she was wheeled into the ambulance, she swore she would find me. But she was never heard from again. My dad was a private person. It's almost 20 years to the day he died, and I could not tell you if he had any political leanings, or how many girlfriends he had before he met my mother, or if he saw action while he served in the army. He was one of those quiet, duty-bound men that kept his thoughts to himself. When my dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, he often had a hard time sleeping at night. Sometimes when I would wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I would find him out at the kitchen table drinking a cup of chamomile tea in hopes that it would soothe him enough that he could go to sleep. If I was not too tired, I would join him sometimes, and we would talk about whatever he was thinking about at that moment. He began to open up to me about his life. He talked about the cruel nuns that ran the Catholic school he attended. He disclosed that the reason he could never get through Full Metal Jacket is because he witnessed a blanket party while he was in the service. My dad also told me about some of the misadventures he experienced during his time as a police officer. Some of the more memorable moments of his career as a police officer included the time that he and his partner had to chase a homeless junkie on top of a moving train, which apparently is a lot harder than it looks in the movies. He told me about the time that it took 5 male officers to carry a drunk woman out of a bar. All of the officers, including himself, had been scratched or bitten by the woman, so they were all required to take an HIV test. He also told me about the time that he was giving a tour of a local jail to a group of school children, only to be interrupted midway through the tour by the desperate cries of a predator who had to be dragged out to solitary confinement. My dad and the group of children looked as the 3 guards carried the man down the hallway. The man soiled himself, and he sobbed and begged not to be put in the cell with the other prisoners. I asked my dad if he ever encountered someone truly evil in his time as an officer. He told me about this incident. It was 1981. My dad and his partner Randy were working the late shift. It was a little after 11:30 p.m. when he got a call from dispatch. A man called in to report that he had just murdered his girlfriend. The location he was calling from was less than 15 minutes from where my dad and Randy were patrolling, so they responded to the incident. The murder took place in an area that had become depressed and crime-ridden after the local factories closed up one by one in the late 70s. Thus, my dad felt on edge as they drove through the neighborhood. Occasionally, he would see people come out of the shadows or out from behind buildings walking to wherever they were going, most likely to buy or sell drugs. The sadness of seeing a person in the otherwise dark and empty neighborhood had an eerie effect. When my dad and Randy arrived at the home where the murder took place, the first thing that they saw was the front door was wide open. They immediately wondered if the murderer reported his crime to dispatch, then took off before the police could arrive. My dad and Randy drew their guns and proceeded with caution towards the front door. Light from the living room was pouring out the door. As my dad got closer to the porch, he saw what he thought was a black dog calmly laying on the living room floor. Randy took the lead and made his way through the front door, his gun drawn as my dad covered from the side. Randy motioned for my dad to enter. When my dad stepped through the door, he realized that what he thought was a dog was actually the body of a woman lying face down in a pool of blood. To her left was a young red-headed man sitting Indian style with his hands on his knees and his head hanging low as he tried to gather his breath. The young man was breathing so hard he was heaving. Both of his hands and forearms were covered in blood and scratch marks. The top of this young man's shirt, his neck, and the right side of his cheek were covered in blood. A bloody knife lay on the floor a few inches in front of the man. The tip of the knife had broken off at an angle. The coroner later found the missing piece of the knife lodged in the dead woman's sternum. It was determined that the girlfriend had been stabbed a total of 27 times. The killer did not seem to have the energy or inclination to fight, and the fact that he reported it himself to the police meant that he seemed ready to take responsibility for his actions. Nonetheless, Randy and my dad kept their guns drawn because a man willing to stab someone to death was not to be taken lightly. My father asked the young man to put his hands behind his head, and to my father's relief the young man complied, though he seemed to have a hard time mustering enough energy to lift his arms. The killer's head was still down as my dad walked over to cuff him. His body was still heaving, and my dad wondered if the young man might be keeping his head down because he was crying. After all, he reported his crime to the police, so it was possible that the young man was being overwhelmed by the gravity of his actions. My dad cuffed one hand and then the other, and the killer seemed to be peacefully surrendering. As my dad squatted down so that he could help lift the killer to his feet, the young man finally turned to face my dad. There was a glee in the killer's eyes, and my dad realized that the young man was not sobbing. He was giggling. The young man smiled at my father, and with a scratchy voice he simply said, "Well, that's done." My dad said at that moment he finally understood that expression about blood running cold. He felt every hair on his body prickle. When my dad and Randy brought the killer into the police station, everyone they passed by, from the veteran police officers to perps with a mile-long rap sheet, looked with shock and horror at the blood-soaked young man. The young man smiled and greeted everyone he saw with a, "How do you do?" or "Good morning," as he walked by. The young man pled guilty and showed no emotion during his interrogation, arraignment, or sentencing. If my dad were alive today, he would tell you that most of the criminals he encountered while he was a police officer were poor, desperate, and products of broken homes. But the young man that he encountered on that late summer night in 1981 was the embodiment of evil. I was almost killed at a house party. This all just happened a few days ago. I need to get this out and hope in the least it can save someone from what I went through. I was invited to a house party with a friend I've had for over 15 years but haven't spent time with in over 5, and some new people. A bit of an older crowd, but it sounded like it would be fun. The first hour was pretty normal. People playing darts and pool, passing drinks around, listening to music, and having a good time. After about an hour, one of the men at the party noticed I hadn't had a drink yet. He went behind a door where they had a small fridge and pulled out a beer for me, and then he opened it while still behind the door. Instead of being a smart woman and asking for one I opened myself, I just figured I was in good company, with at least 2 people I'd known for a long time, and they wouldn't let anything bad happen to me. God, was I so wrong. A few sips into this beer, I felt pretty woozy. So I set it down, and immediately everyone was asking me to have more, to have another, to chug it, including this person I'd known since we were kids. I knew that things were very, very wrong. I leaned up against a counter and checked my surroundings. Where's my closest exit if I leave? How quickly can I get home? It's only a 10-kilometer walk. Good Lord, 2 huge dogs are sleeping at the entrance we came in. I went for my coat. It was on a chair in front of me. They noticed, and one man started asking where I thought I was going. I replied with, "Oh, just for a cigarette." Everyone else was smoking inside. They knew it wasn't that bad, but I played it off as just needing some fresh air. One of the partygoers came up behind me and elbowed me across the back of the head. I moved fast. As I got my hand on my coat, someone ordered the dogs to get me. Within the blink of an eye, these 2 huge bull mastiffs are up and bolting towards me, barking like I'd never heard before. I dropped my big coat to move fast and made it to the back door just in time for them to slam into it from behind. I hear everyone inside laughing about it. It was cold, like below 0 cold, and I was locked outside in some random dude's backyard without having my phone, my coat, nothing. About 30 minutes went by and the dogs finally stopped barking. A woman came outside to get me. She apologized ferociously, told me she locked up the dogs in another room, and said that she'd get me home immediately. With her arm around me shaking, we walked back in. She said, "These guys are assholes. I'm so sorry. I won't let anything else happen." I knew in the very least if I could get my coat, I'd have my knife and my phone to call for help, or even just push the button for emergency that notifies my husband and mom. When we went in, my friend asked what happened. She thought I had left and forgot my jacket. Yeah, okay. It made sense to me in the moment. Her husband offered to drive me home. I knew them, or I thought I did. Scared as hell, I took them up on the offer. I didn't know this other woman at all, and low-key thought she may have been in on this. I was wrong again. We started driving to my house and drove right past it. Guys, that was my house. Did you forget? They knew where it was. Oh no, I really want you to see my house. We're moving soon and you haven't seen it yet. Just a quick tour, then we'll take you home, my old friend said. At this point, I didn't think anything bad would happen. I used to trust her, and her partner. So I agreed to go in, but just for a few minutes. We went inside to a sunroom, and I noticed yet another large dog parked in the front of the door just inside. He didn't make a sound. Once inside the actual house, things got worse to the point where I thought I was in a damn Hunger Games or some shit. I was immediately grabbed and slammed into a wall head first. Someone punched me from behind and pulled my hair. She started screaming, "You won't survive tonight, bitch! I saw you touch my husband! Tonight you fucking die!" And flashed a large knife. I had no idea what she was on about. I was never near him and am married myself. I managed to push the emergency button on my phone. 3 times on the power button to send 3 pictures, exact location, photos from the front and rear facing cameras, and 3-minute voice clip to my husband and my mother. I knew that if I was going to get killed, at least they'd know what happened and to get these people. Someone kept hitting me, slamming my face into a wall. I already still felt really off from that drink they gave me and wasn't as quick as I usually am, but I managed to get away. I swung around and ran right to the door we came in, where the other dog was. I ran outside making sure the door was closed behind me. I threw my boots on faster than the flash and took off running up the 2-kilometer driveway. Why? Why did I choose to move to the country? The nearest house to me was literally mine. I just ran, scared as hell, and didn't look back. The driveway was full of ice, dark, and I could hear screaming behind me. Then the dog barking viciously behind me. I ran faster, figured I'd kill myself with cardio before getting eaten by a snarling dog. She sent him after me, with an order to kill. I made it to the end of the driveway praying that someone would be driving by on the road. Nothing. So I just kept running. It was after 3 a.m. by now. By the time I made it to my house, my legs were about to give out from underneath me and my heart rate was over 130 beats per minute. But I couldn't hear the dog anymore. I couldn't hear anyone screaming. My husband was out of town for a Christmas event with his daughter. He called me just as I was getting inside my house, finally, and said the police were on their way. About 25 minutes went by and it was silent outside. I peeked out for a much-needed cigarette, still on the phone with him, and discovered 4 unidentifiable people standing across from me in the dark of my driveway. They were whistling like Negan does in The Walking Dead. One said, little pig, we said you had to die tonight." But I didn't recognize the voice. I tossed my still-lit cigarette and bolted inside. I locked and barricaded the door of my basement apartment. The police took over an hour to arrive. By the time they did, everyone was gone. By 5:30, I still hadn't slept yet, was badly injured from the events that took place, and still shakingly afraid. I was checked over. Nothing broken, just bruised and sore. They took my statement, and nothing has happened to them, yet. They still live around me. I fear that one of them lives right upstairs in my home. What's the lesson here? Every time I hear a scary narration on this channel, especially the real-life I almost died stories, I try to take something away from them. This, I trusted too easily. I had an emergency measure in place to contact my loved ones because I'm deathly allergic to bee stings and I can't speak if I'm stung. That didn't save my life, though. Had they decided to try to break into my house, they could have, and I don't think I would have survived that night. I'm scared to leave my house. I have nowhere else to run to. Whether they were hazing me or actually wanted me dead the other night, I hope to never find out. I hope it's all over. I hope I can find a new place sooner than later. I hope anyone who hears this story trusts their instincts and gut feelings more than I did that night. If something feels off, it probably is. I fought through anxiety for so long that I tend to ignore it when I have a bad feeling because I got so used to it just being an irrational fear. Never again. Stay safe, everyone. My roommate and I were living on campus, but decided we would rather start looking into renting a small, cheap home for us to transfer into. We knew we wanted to live near campus, so the commute wasn't hell. Living in a rural area was bad enough, and our college campus was mainly forest surrounding it. Luckily, we had cafes and stores within the campus, since the school is basically situated as its own college town. This town is literally made for us, the college students, my roommate Faith whispered to herself while skimming websites for available housing nearby. There aren't many options around here if we're looking to rent a house, she continued while turning over to me. I walked over and peered at her laptop. I started skimming pages as well and finally stumbled upon a place available about 3 miles down the road. Interesting, I said. This place has 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a backyard. Guess how much? Faith mumbled sarcastically. Too much for us. Nope. Apparently this leasing office is offering this rental for only $500 a month. Insane. Is this a prank? We pay double that on campus. And this guy who posted the offer, James, claims the utilities and such are included. Faith choked on her coffee and spit half of it out. Are you kidding me, Erin? I know we live in the middle of nowhere, but $500 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house? That doesn't sound right whatsoever. Like you said, we're paying $1,000 for ours on campus, and it's smaller. She was right. Something was off, and this offer seemed too good to be true. On top of that, the offer was on Craigslist, which is known to be sketchy at times. Even without the Craigslist element, this guy's post was off as well. There was only one photo of the home, and although it seemed fine and put together, this photo didn't tell us much about the surroundings or the inside. Let's text him. His number's right here. Faith started dialing the numbers on her phone. The man replied relatively quickly. I asked him if this is a joke because it's way too good to be true. Haha. I rolled my eyes at her and laughed, but her face suddenly turned blank. He doesn't have a sense of humor, but he said to come by. He gave the address and directions. Here. I grabbed her phone and saw that he replied with, It's real. If you're interested, come by to view. The home is at 277 Fort Mill Road. I wasn't all that familiar with the area, as we both just started attending university and transferred from Ohio to Utah. I wasn't a moron, though. I'd be able to find it. We hopped in my car and started Google Maps. It again was very close, only 3 miles south of us. As we got closer, we noticed the map on our phone showed mainly shrubbery and forest ahead. We automatically knew we were heading into a deserted area of some sort. Isolated towns and villages have always spooked me, but heading into one was making me extremely anxious in that moment. I could tell Faith saw the emotion on my face. You good? I know you watch a lot of horror movies, especially lately. Don't worry. She smirked and then told me that her map seemed to show that the only grocery store was still on campus, as well as any type of shopping in general. I sighed. Well, I guess we'll be doing some traveling with shopping. No more rolling out of bed and walking over to Starbucks. She laughed and shrugged her shoulders. We were a few moments away from the road. We started pulling up and noticed that the entire block was the only area nearby covered in some type of sand or dirt. Basically a dirt road. Everything surrounding the homes on this one block was covered in greenery and trees. It almost looked like these houses were planted on an abandoned baseball field. We got out of the car and texted James that we arrived. He told us earlier that he would meet us there, but I honestly didn't expect this. This looks like an isolated mini ghost town. Does anyone know of this road? This map is showing that we're the only ones out here. Our house and 3 others next to it. Does he live in one of them? I don't know, Faith, I snapped. I was getting more anxious as I waited for him to arrive so I could ask him what the hell was up with this whole area. We seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Just as my thoughts were spinning out of control, I heard some rocks tumble. I turned around and saw a man walking towards us with rain boots on as he shuffled along the path of rocks and sand. May I add, the lawns on the property were non-existent. The homes had more large patches of rocks and dirt in the front yard where the grass would have been. Hello there. I'm James. James spoke with a low voice and looked to be in his mid-40s. He was wearing a somewhat dirty hoodie covering most of his head and face. He shook our hands as we reluctantly accepted, and I immediately threw my questions at him. Girls, I'm a busy man. It's a great deal for college students in the area as a cheap price and convenient location. Privacy and peace are all you'll get out here. Nice change, huh? I just rented out this home and I'm currently offering it for $500, as listed. The other 3 on Fort Mill Road are inhabited by families at the moment. If one leaves, I'll be offering to any college students interested as well. Let your friends know. Everything he told us made sense, I suppose. I wanted to ask why the road was so isolated from everyone else in town, as well as why there were only 4 houses on the road in total. I was slightly scared to ask any more questions beyond the basics of moving in or price. He seemed to be rushing us, but the truth is, Faith and I were desperate to leave our dorm. It was small, stuffy, and noisy at night when some students above us would throw frequent parties. This seemed like the perfect solution and opportunity for us. I turned to Faith, who seemed speechless. "Do you want to do this?" She turned to the house, which was basic. Cream interior, brown roofing, small home, nothing special. "Let's see inside first," Faith demanded. I stared her down, signaling her to chill out. James immediately headed towards the house that was for sale and motioned us over. "Come on, girls, I need to be leaving soon. I have much work to do. It's getting late." We followed this stranger toward the house as we looked at each other in confusion. Still, we followed him. As we walked inside the door, everything seemed normal. It was quiet and smelled like a new home, though the air had a heavy odor of sawdust and dirt. It must have been from the foundation or outside of the home. I wonder how old these homes were, but I wasn't about to ask any more questions and ruin this opportunity. James seems like the type of guy who wasn't okay with wasting time or bullshitting. "Here we are." He waved us inside. There was a kitchen attached to a small living room, bathroom, and our 2 bedrooms. It was so normal it almost diminished any anxiety I had been holding inside. "Seems good. Water's working? Electricity?" I asked James. "Yep. I must tell you that issues may arise, but nothing serious. If any power or water issues occur, you can reach me, and I'll work on it as soon as possible. This side of town has relatively frequent blackouts because of the storms in the summer. Anyway, deposit's $250, and you may submit rent to me on the last Friday of every month." Faith and I were getting tired and honestly wanted to just go home and sleep. We agreed that we wanted to go for it. "Okay, I have cash for a deposit. Do you?" Faith asked. I grabbed cash out of my wallet and counted as Faith reached into hers and took out cash. We split it and handed the money to James. "Thanks, ladies. When will you be wanting to move in?" Faith and I told him that the morning after would be fine. We needed to still gather our belongings and alert campus of our decision to transfer to a new residence. The next morning, we were ready to move in. Being college students, we didn't really have much anyway, so it was pretty easy. When moving in, I couldn't help but notice again how odd it was that there were only 4 homes, including ours, resided on the block. I peered into the other 3 homes, which looked identical to ours. I can't lie, these homes looked super cheap. Not ancient, not brand new, but also not at all a good investment. The homes all had blinds that were covering all of the windows of the homes, so it was impossible to see inside. I was extremely curious. Don't you find it weird? I feel like we're all alone out here. Our neighbors aren't even visible, and where are their cars? Faith contemplated. I also felt uneasy when noticing that. Why didn't they have cars? Even one car outside of each home would be normal. He said there were families in them. They were inhabited. Weird word to use in this context, if you ask me. Let's just set everything up, I said as I carried our bags inside. Faith took some more and then parked our car on the side of the home. We were going to have a guy come out there and set up the cable and Wi-Fi, but we received a call from him out of nowhere. "Hey, Erin, this is Doug from Spectrum. You had an appointment with us tonight, but I see you live in the Fort Mill area." I paused for a moment, confused. "Yes, Fort Mill Road. Is there an issue?" He paused as well. Issue isn't the word, I guess. The thing is, setting up Wi-Fi and cable out there will be tricky. I never have any luck lately because of how shoddy the connection and power tends to be near there. The signal isn't strong at all. Do you want me to still try? It might be useless to attempt. I didn't know what to say. It was weird, but we did live in a rural town. I didn't expect this issue, though, with the home. "It's okay, let's try it out, and if it's still shoddy, we can live with it. Some TV here and some there, some signal to complete my homework will suffice for now." Deep inside, though, I was aggravated because I didn't want to run into issues now with power or doing my schoolwork. I realized we may need to travel more than expected to campus. Now we needed to make trips for food, shopping in general, and Wi-Fi connection. At this point, I was too tired to care. The man showed up and set everything up, and as I watched him leave, I noticed the sun setting and the lights illuminating the inside of the homes on the block. Every home glowed with light from behind the curtains, seeming to be instantaneous. It was very odd and startling at best. Faith walked up behind me, scaring me. "You saw that too?" She peered at the homes and squinted for a while. "I can't see shit inside." It was true. You couldn't see a thing. The blinds were so thick and every window of the home just sat there aglow. I just don't get it. I haven't seen anyone ever walk from inside or outside of the homes. There's still no cars outside. "Should we ask James?" Faith nervously asked. I kept looking up and down the road. It was starting to bother me more and more. It was just sketchy enough to pique my curiosity again. "I'm calling James about this power issue and asking him why our neighbors are so odd," Faith blurted out as she ran over to the couch. We sat in silence there as Faith texted James. "I'm just waiting to see what he has to say. It's still early. We can always back out of this arrangement." My mind was racing. I wanted a cheap house. I also wanted privacy and peace. Isn't that what we signed up for here? Why was I suddenly so worried about this situation? A loud noise came from the other side of the room. It was Faith's phone. A text from James. She read it aloud. "Your neighbors signed up for some privacy as well. Try not to be so nosy and let them be. As far as the power and Wi-Fi, I alerted you to this and you accepted." I looked at Faith with confusion. He was being so rude and blunt with us. It's almost as if he was telling us to shut up and accept it because we were stuck with it. I didn't like this. I had an overwhelming feeling. Nausea. I truly felt something wasn't right. This whole situation had been so sketchy from the start and so unofficial. This guy's professionalism and help was almost non-existent, and he didn't seem to be who he said he was. What kind of leasing officer would act this way? "I think we need to leave. This is a joke. I don't even feel safe with this guy as our supposed landlord," Faith mumbled. I agreed, but didn't want to make any decisions until tomorrow morning. I turned to Faith and sleepily said, "Let's get some rest and figure it out tomorrow. It's late." She shrugged and rolled over. I woke up early that morning to the sound of rain outside. It was extremely quiet out there, with all the sounds of rain hitting the roof being the only thing noticeable. I yawned and got up, still feeling out of it. As I waddled over to the kitchen to quickly make my coffee, I noticed my car window slightly open as I peered out the kitchen window. What the hell? I walked outside and looked into the back seat. My backpack was gone. I had my laptop and textbooks in there, as well as my wallet. I have no idea why I left my wallet in the car, but I did. I felt like an idiot. At that moment, I was livid and had enough of this. I called the cops. I waited outside the house in the rain. As Faith came outside after waking up, she hugged me. "Are you okay?" I turned to her. "No? I called the cops. I'm telling them what's going on. Someone stole my backpack from my car. I left my window open. I also left my wallet in there." She looked stunned. "What did you leave in your wallet? Cancel your cards if you left them in there. I hope you didn't have too much cash in it." I did. I left $450 in change, as well as all my cards. I hopped on my phone and got ready to request cancellation of all of them. As soon as I signed into my APP, my bank alerted me of fraudulent activities that had occurred moments before. I looked down at my phone, feeling lightheaded. This guy had been using my credit and debit card to buy artillery and went on a Walmart spree, totaling thousands of dollars in a matter of 2 hours. What the hell was going on? The cops showed up moments later, and as a female officer stepped out, I ran toward her. "Officer, thank you for coming so fast," I said as I ran out of breath. "I've had some valuables stolen, and I'd like to talk to you about the situation here." She listened as I explained our predicament, and as I tried to finish, she cut me off. I hadn't even told her about the living arrangement yet. Erin, thank you for reporting this. There has been an ongoing investigation of this area. Fort Mill Road has been on the watch for almost a year now, showing frequent criminal activity within the last few months. I was confused. She continued, there have been 7 reports of burglary alone in this tight area, mostly dealing with cars being broken into down the road where the nature park is. Again, Faith and I didn't know much about the area since we were transfer students. I had no idea a nature park was nearby at all, let alone anything else. Officer, we just recently moved into this home. We're renting it from a man named James who claims to be renting out these other homes to college kids who need cheap housing. Do you know what's going on with our other neighbors? The officer looked at me like I had spoken gibberish. You're renting this house? From who? Ladies, these homes have been abandoned. We figured whoever this James person is, he's at the center of it. I frantically looked towards the homes. I remembered how Faith and I saw lights glowing from within the last night. They were inhabited, as James put it. Families were supposed to be renting them out as well. I looked over at the officer. But we both saw those homes lit up inside last night. People had to be in them. I'm not going crazy. Faith turned to me. That's why we didn't see any cars. We didn't even see people leave or enter. I knew something was wrong here, Erin. We didn't check everything out. I knew she was right. I was suspicious the entire time, but was afraid to speak up and bother this guy. This whole scenario was set up and planned out so perfectly that you wouldn't think it was strange. We saw some weird stuff, but decided it wasn't enough to scare us away. I'm helping you ladies take your belongings to the car. We need to get you out of this area. This isn't safe and barely a suitable place for anyone to live, let alone 2 young college students. We'll document this in a report and investigate Fort Mill immediately. My stomach was sick. I couldn't believe that this guy fooled us. How? I was just thankful we ended it there on day 2. If we stayed any longer, I'm honestly not sure what would have occurred that night. We drove home, and later that night we received a call from Officer Daughtry, who had helped us that morning. Hello, Erin. Are you both doing all right? I told her that we were okay, but asked her if she had any updates on Fort Mill. She paused. Well, we do. I want to be the first to say that I'm so glad you called when you did. I suddenly felt sick again. What was she about to tell me? She continued, We have new information on the situation. James Riviera was the gentleman who claimed to have rented out the house to you. We caught him later this afternoon and we were able to retrieve your belongings, except for the wallet. I'm sure you've notified your bank and credit providers. I felt so down and stupid for falling into his trap. Faith looked ashamed but relieved. We have also found out what was going on with those homes on Fort Mill Road. I gulped. Ladies, Mr. Riviera was not only burglarizing cars and homes, but also scamming college students by luring them into abandoned homes. He's been claiming they're for rent and usable because he knew the water was running inside at the moment and somehow connected a power source to these homes. We're trying to find out where he's living, as we're finding power lines on the side of the homes, with some running under the soil. Our teams managed to shut down his Craigslist account and post. I was stunned. I had no words and neither did Faith. We just looked at each other. The officer continued. You're both safe now, and that's what matters. I'm not sure what else Mr. Riviera had planned, but he seemed to have just started this Craigslist scam recently, possibly 2 months ago. Please be more cautious next time, girls. We're alerting the campus so officials can take any needed steps to protect the students. Faith took the phone from me. Did you ever find out what was going on in those homes across from us? Officer Daughtry's tone changed as she spoke. Yeah, the other homes were abandoned and Mr. Riviera had them hooked up somehow on a timer daily. Realistic, huh? Our police have been investigating for months and we hadn't seen this. Mr. Riviere had the homes synchronized to appear lit at dusk. As soon as sunset came around, the homes were programmed to light up inside every night. He fooled people having those homes look occupied. Evil genius, really, she sarcastically finished. I felt exhausted, even from just hearing this whole psychotic situation spelled out for us. Inhabited, I mumbled to myself. I remember him using that stupid word. I should have known he was crazy. Who talks like that? It's just how it is, ladies. Criminals prey on unsuspecting people. Unfortunately for college kids, they're well aware of your nature. You kids tend to be more gullible, and they know that. Top it off with the need for cheap housing, and they found a match. She was spot on. The thing is, we felt safe in this new rural town we called our home during college. We didn't feel scared. I don't know why, but sometimes we become too trusting of strangers in certain contexts. I suspected people out here were the epitome of small town inviting and generous, perhaps even warm and friendly by nature. We had signs, but we ignored them. As a warning, make it a priority to check everything out before determining your next move. As a college student, I learned the hard way, and I hope no one makes a mistake like this anymore. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, share it, all that good stuff. And if you want to help support what I do, debate on becoming a channel member or even a patron. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video. And I will catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye. I peeked out for a much-needed cigarette, still on the phone with him, and discovered four unidentifiable. Oh my god, I cannot speak. Unidentifiable. I just cannot say it when I'm trying to read it.